Dear all, welcome to the GoNano online conference on responsiveness to societal needs and values in nanotechnologies and beyond. We are very excited to have you here. We have been looking so much forward to meet you. We started planning this conference before the world knew anything about COVID-19, and now we are happy that through this medium we are finally able to meet you in this conference. So let's get started. My name is Lise Bitz. I am the coordinator of the project that organizes this conference on behalf of the Danish Board of Technology Foundation and all of our partners of the GoNano-project. I would like to welcome you. Our conference is split into 3 blocks, actually, 3 Thursdays in the next 3 weeks. Well, this is the first. Today, we will focus on 2 topics. The first topic is the potential of co-creation and citizen engagement for research and innovation. We take nanotechnologies as our starting point. That's the first session of today. The second session of today focuses on the topic of gender equality and diversity, the processes that you can undertake and the outcomes that you can achieve. That's session 2 of today. To help us get through these topics, we have with us today 2 excellent speakers. The first is Deliyanakis, Head of Economic and Social Transitions from DG Research of the European Commission. The second speaker that we have with us today is a slight changes in the program, but I think not in a bad way. It's Pépin, Senior Policy Officer of the Gender Section, also of DG Research and Innovation with the European Commission. Welcome to our speakers and thank you very much for joining us as well. I also have with me 2 co-hosts from the GoNano Consortium. The first of these is Vanessa Moore from the European Institute of Women's Health. Vanessa will host the second session of today. My second co-host is David Azoulay from the Center for International Environmental Law. David will help us with keeping track of all the questions in the Q&A, and he will make sure that we are made aware of your questions. Further support that we have with us today is our art director, Søren Jebsen. Søren will draw our conversation today. So he will do his best to create a graphic representation of everything that we talk about today. Furthermore, I have 2 colleagues with me, Sigrid Neuhaus and Mette Simonsen, who are our technical support today. Even if we have tested and tried out this setup many times, it will almost be a miracle if we manage to get through the conference without any technical mishaps. So if that happens, we hope that you will bear with us. Throughout this conference, we are very keen to hear your thoughts and questions. And we would also like to make this conference a little bit of fun as well. That is why we have multiple opportunities for asking questions. And we have also dotted the program with a few exercises for your bodies and for your eyes. Probably you are all a little bit tired from spending a lot of time behind the screen, and we want to help you with that. Okay, I just have now a few additional points by way of housekeeping before we can really begin. The first is, I think many of you have already noticed, we use Slido for your input, not the YouTube chat. The YouTube chat we use for technical support. So if you have any problems, YouTube chat. In the YouTube chat, we will also be sharing a few links throughout the conference to interesting material that we invite you to explore further. Slido has a Q&A section. In the Q&A, you can ask questions continuously throughout the conference. You can also vote on questions asked by your fellow participants, questions that you also think are important to take up. I think some of you might have already noticed Slido. We have right now an action running. Which country are you joining us from? And I see that a number of you have already answered. And on, I think, first place at the moment is the Czech Republic, closely followed by Italy, Spain, France, and the Netherlands. But we have participants from almost all over the world, from Finland, from the Dominican Republic, from Tampere in the US. So thank you everyone very much for joining us from all of these different places today, and we hope that you will have a good time with us at the conference. If you haven't been able to log into Slido yet, you just have to go to the Slido app. Best thing is to use your mobile phone and use the event code #GoNano to log in. A final item, which I'm sure it's not needed to say, but just for safety, please, when you are asking questions in the Slido chat, you be sure to use an appropriate and sober language and be respectful when to your fellow participants when you do so. Thank you very much. And I think now we are ready to begin. So our first session of today is titled Outcomes and Recommendations for Strengthening Co-Creation, Moving from Horizon 2020 to Horizon Europe. In this session, we will talk about the value of engaging with society and building responsiveness to societal needs and values into research innovation processes. Our first speaker in this session that I just briefly introduced is Nicholas Deliyanakis, Head of Sector Economic and Social Transitions, DG Research and Innovation with the European Commission. He will talk about the Commission's perspectives and the transition towards the next framework program. Before becoming the Head of Sector, he has worked as the Deputy Head of the Unit for Industrial Technologies and as a Program Officer in Nanotechnology and in the Marie Curie program. Nicholas joined the Commission in 1999, but before that he has worked as a physicist in nuclear fusion research in the UK. He has a first-class degree in physics from King's College London, his PhD in plasma physics from Oxford University. He's a chartered physicist, member of the Institute of Physics, and an associate of King's College London. We're very happy and honored to have him with us today. And I would like now to invite Nicholas to take the stage and share with us his presentation. Welcome, Nicholas.
Thank you, Lise, for this introduction. I'm now going to share my screen and the presentation. I hope you can all see it. Is this working? As Lisa said, I'm going to talk about how we in the Commission see inclusiveness, engagement, and more broadly the societal elements in the framework programs. And in particular, because that is the part I work on, I'm going to talk about Cluster 4 on digital industry and space, because actually, it may not be a natural home for inclusiveness and engagement, and yet it offers countless opportunities for this. And I'm going to go over some of the ideas that we are exploring. So, first of all, I'll say a few words about the cluster, then I will say something about the engagement aspects of it. So in the past, the parts that are in this cluster were separate. They are still separate in Horizon 2020, but we combined them in one cluster because they are major drivers and enablers, and that also makes them very interesting from the point of view of engagement. The cluster is about the capacities for industrial competitiveness, but not only that, but also now in the context of COVID, European resilience. That's an idea that is gaining traction, of course, as well as the older idea of addressing global challenges through the technologies. And it will support what we now call the twin green and digital transition or transformation, leading to a digital, low carbon and circular economy. And it will do that while engaging with people and maintaining, safeguarding European social and ethical values. So we don't want any good technology. We want the technologies that are actually support the twin and green and digital transition, but also support and engage humans. Now, the cluster is, of course, industry oriented. However, what is less obvious but equally important is that other players play crucial roles in it, not just ancillary roles, but crucial roles that are needed for success. So a few facts and figures. I will go quickly over them because we can share this presentation. EU industry is very important. It provides 20% of jobs, 80% of the EU's exports. And the ICT sector in particular makes up 5% of the EU economy. A lot of business expenditure is ICT related. And as we all know, the next generation of digital technologies are both vital and are going to transform life and work, are already transforming life and work. Circular economy is another key policy behind the cluster that is beneficial for businesses, but in two ways, environmentally and economically, as you can see from these figures. Energy intensive industries, another major stakeholder in this cluster and its predecessors, that is responsible for 20% of greenhouse gas emissions. And here we need new technologies to make a fundamental transformation in the way energy intensive industries work and make Europe a leader in this area. And finally, the space sector, very important also in Europe, even though a lot of the very impressive stories may come from outside Europe, but Europe has a large, very important space sector and is pioneering many technologies and is of course very active in space. And on top of that, space technologies are important enablers with regard to positioning, to Earth observation, and they have, just like digital, they have applications almost everywhere. So the political priorities that this cluster addresses are essentially 3 of the 6 priorities of the president. They are the Green Deal, a Europe fit for the digital age, and Europe that works for economy, the European economy that works for people, and of course it supports the European industrial strategy, as well as many other ancillary policies like the space strategy, the action plan on critical raw materials, the action plan for the circular economy, and so on. Now to turn to the human side, our commissioner, Maria Gabriel, has stressed the importance of interactions between citizens and scientists and policymakers. It is something that is becoming more and more important. It is not new, of course, but we are not there yet. The vision of this cluster, digital industry and space, following what I said earlier, is threefold. One is to support an industrial and digital transformation in terms of technologies, developing the technologies, deploying them, and very importantly, securing what we now call autonomy, strategic autonomy in technologies and value chains. Some people call it technological sovereignty. There are many words for it. It doesn't mean that we want to be we want Europe to be closed. It just means that when it comes to some key technologies, we want to have our own. Second, very importantly, as explained already, we need climate neutral, circular and clean industry, as well as the products that industry will enable, the clean and sustainable products that industry will enable. And finally, and that is perhaps is the newest element and perhaps not the most obvious in an industrial cluster, is to make a major contribution to inclusiveness and to resilience. And that can be done in many ways. Of course, it does not have a cluster like this, does not have all the answers, but it has many of the answers when it comes to engagement with users, with workers, with citizens, with people. I don't like the word citizens, by the way, but it means people, of course. In terms of developing skills and also in playing a role in developing regions. And perhaps that is a good way of addressing populism. We keep hearing that people turn to populism because they feel left behind. Well, a positive way of addressing that is through new technologies that engage with humans. Not the only way, of course. Very quickly, and this is mainly for reference, there are 4 key strategic orientations in Horizon Europe, which address the political objectives, and Cluster 4 addresses primarily 3 of those 4, the ones I have highlighted here. I know this slide is difficult to read, but again, it is for reference. The 3 key strategic orientations we address are translated into 6 expected impacts, which projects that are funded out of this cluster will be expected to address. So in terms of content, not impact, but in terms of the content of the cluster, it covers 10 so-called intervention areas of work, including manufacturing, underlying digital technologies like photonics or micro and nano components. It includes, very importantly, the emerging technologies, the ones that are not that close to maturity, but seem to be interesting and important in the future. Advanced materials, by which we also understand nanotechnology, artificial intelligence and robotics, next generation internet, high performance computing and big data, circular and low carbon clean industries, and space, both in terms of the underlying technologies and in terms of various services, including Earth observation. So for those who are interested in the background, 2 years ago, we updated our approach to key enabling technologies. Key enabling technologies are, of course, not a new idea. And I don't have time to go into all that, but 2 years ago, we updated the approach and the definition. And in that report that you see here, with a link, Refining Industry, Defining Innovation, you will see, amongst other things, some ideas about engagement and participation in the development or use of key enabling technologies. Now, some examples of what we are doing in the predecessor program, and here I will focus more on the industry and material side, and including nanotechnology, than the digital side, but there are good examples from all areas of work. It's things like examples include turning construction waste into new materials, smart manufacturing, purification technologies, ways to reduce energy consumption in the process industry. And in all these cases, we start with certain underlying technologies that are, if you like, the smaller part of the picture. And then for each one of these technologies, there is a bigger picture about how they are used, what services and what products they lead to, and what impacts they have on the environment. Other examples are the materials that we need to support sustainable power, both for generation and for storage. Um, um, uh, Advanced materials for all sorts of applications, materials for batteries, materials for improving buildings, and materials for purification, and materials for more efficient solar cells. And of course, in many of these cases, many of these materials are in fact nanomaterials. They are enabled by nanotechnology. And now I turn to the citizen engagement in the second part of the talk. Broadly speaking, citizen engagement is a fundamental part of the Commission's push for democracy and participation. I need not quote speeches of the President, but I'm sure you are aware that the Commission is particularly interested in engaging and in listening and in encouraging more participatory decision making. When we turn to the research and innovation, that translates into many different initiatives and priorities. There is the EU Open Science Policy. It is an integral part of the European research area. And in Horizon 2020, the current framework program, we already have 2,000 projects with societal engagement of one form or another, direct or indirect, as well as 20 dedicated projects for citizen science. Now, there are many reasons why the engagement of people is important. One is that it contributes to excellence. It contributes to what is done, because of course, the more brains you bring, the more and the more voices you bring to a problem, the better the solutions will be. And because it brings more creativity. The second, it increases the effectiveness of what we do, because if people have been involved at an early stage, then it is more likely that the outcomes will be relevant to what people need and the expectations of society with regard to artificial intelligence or nanotechnology, for example. And also on the economic front, it actually makes life easier for those who will want to bring products to market. And finally, it improves the relationship between science and society. That is not a new problem, of course, not a new issue. We all know about people who are particularly good at popularizing science. But there is still a long way to go, and it is crucially important now, because not only is it important to bring science to people, it is very important to address fake news. It is, to put it very simply, it is very important to serve the truth, and science does that. So for all these reasons, there is citizen engagement is important, and even a cluster that is a part of Horizon Europe that is not an obvious home for engagement is trying to promote it. So in order to understand a little better the ideas we have for the future, I will say a few words about how we see social sciences and humanities in general, and engagement in particular. A few examples, existing examples, and finally a few ideas for the future. So I will start with some existing examples from Horizon 2020. A lot of these come from what we now call NMBP, nanomaterials, biotech, and production, one of the predecessors of Cluster 4, which covered nanotechnology, amongst other things. So as many of you know, we have projects that popularized nanotechnology and first explained it at an early stage in terms of trying to explain risks and benefits, and then tried to engage people in the underlying thinking. And of course, GoNano is an excellent example of that. This year, there will be a new project. We signed a grant for a new project called Sockets, Societal Engagement in Key Enabling Technologies. And that is to build on all the previous work and enable industry to engage with people in developing and applying technologies like nanotechnology or artificial intelligence, and do it in, if you like, in a bi-directional way, two-way engagement. Other examples are human-centered approaches to factories. So a lot is said about automation, about what consequences that will have for workers and for the jobs of the future. So we try to approach this positively, including through a number of projects that looked at worker-centered workplaces, at interactions between people and machines. In other words, they look not at replacing people, but at using technologies to make the work of people more creative and more satisfying. And there are many examples. All these are links. So if you are curious, you can follow the links to the project websites. In parallel, we are looking at policy issues in the industrial policy of the Commission, but also in initiatives like the one on blueprints for skills, which are funded from the Erasmus program. And we have played a strong role in informing those programs. Then there is a group of activities, projects that are about people as consumers, as users, rather. The word consumer is maybe not a very good one. User is maybe a better word. So we have looked at all sorts of things like lighting systems, systems to help the disabled, and increasingly important to people like me, the elderly. And finally, we have looked at cultural heritage, including nanotechnologies to restore art and monuments. Then we have, and that is a fourth main area of work when it comes to engagement, ethics, and society, a number of projects, and these have not come from NMBP, but from other programs, that have started looking at the ethics of artificial intelligence, the impact of smart systems, and the use of big data, all crucial issues. It's very much unfinished work, and there will be much more of that in the future, including under Horizon Europe. So in Horizon Europe, we want to implement all the ideas and the principles I mentioned earlier in many different ways. We want to encourage what we now call co-creation of our entire agendas. We want people to be engaged, not just scientists or people in industry or other experts to be engaged in the R&I agendas, but as many as wide parts of society as possible. So we want people both to do research and innovation in some ways, but also to be involved in shaping the outcomes. And that we want to do both through dedicated activities like GoNano, but also more broadly by looking at contributions in mainstream projects and looking at how the R&I results are taken up. So some of the ideas that we now explore for the first work program of the cluster for digital industry and space. And it is too early to talk about the work program, even though it has been leaked. But some of the ideas include engagement in things like the circular economy, because circular economy relies crucially on design. There is, by the way, one of the initiatives of the president of the Commission is the new European Bauhaus, whereby different users and people from all walks of life can come together to create in certain areas, just like in the original Bauhaus between the wars. And that idea is particularly interesting, important in areas like the circular economy, because there you need more than technologies, you need attitudes, you need new approaches, you need cities, and you need people who live in cities, and so on. Then we are looking at engagement at smart manufacturing. I gave some examples of that already, how to make it better for workers, and how to use it to enable work, to empower workers. We look at localized manufacturing closer to the consumer. Sorry about this typo, I see it now. That is also very important for the circular economy, for minimizing waste, as well as revitalizing cities. So you see all these ideas actually interact with each other, things like resilience and the circular economy. And Cluster 4 can enable that to some extent. We are looking at bias-free artificial intelligence, and I think my colleagues will have more to say about that later. We look at trustworthy social networks. We look at how we can help workers adapt, upgrade their skills for the so-called Industry 4, which is digitized industry. In fact, we call it Industry 5, meaning automated industry with a strong human element. And finally, we look at the longer term through foresight activities. If you want to know more, there are many links, many websites about the industrial research in general, the examples I showed you earlier, and success stories. Lots of articles in the Horizon magazine, obviously not only about industrial technologies, as well as very interesting key enabling projects, key enabling technology projects on YouTube. This is all I had to say. I'm sure you will challenge me on these approaches, and I will try to do what I can to shed some light on these ideas. But I'm equally willing to listen and to learn. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nicholas, for this very interesting presentation with some very encouraging perspectives, I think, that you presented. I would like to just remind everyone in the audience that there is the opportunity to ask your question in the Slido Q&A. And now is a very good time to enter those questions into the Q&A, because I am going to invite also my co-host David to join and to share with us some of the questions that are being asked in the Q&A. Now is your chance to ask Nicholas Deliyanakis any questions that you have burning at the tip of your tongue after this presentation. So please go ahead and ask your questions in the Q&A. David, I see that you have your camera. Can you also please turn on your sound?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session. As we start, there was already, and I can only reiterate the invitation by Lisa to please take advantage of the Slido tool to ask questions and to enter into this conversation. We do have one question already that was put forward, which was, what are, according to you, the biggest roadblocks for more two-way engagement and co-creation? Would it be motivation, knowledge of advantage, skills, or others?
I would say the main obstacle is momentum. I would call it momentum. In other words, the habit, if you like, to do things with the usual stakeholders. Of course, our area of work is about industry, ostensibly. So, of course, we have to work with industry. And of course, industry is also interested in the human side, obviously. But often we focus on the technologies because we all know that the technologies are important and useful. We take that for granted. And then we often forget to engage simply because of our momentum. If you ask me, that would be the main obstacle. A secondary obstacle, but not the main one, is of course the various absence of tools that we need to make this engagement more effective and more widespread. But momentum, I think, is an important impediment that we need to address, and I see that often in my own work when people just say, and I used to say it myself. I've been in the Commission for 21 years now. And in the beginning, at least not in my Marie Skłodowska-Curie phase, but in the beginning of my work on industrial technologies, none of us thought very much about people. Of course, we would all say that technologies are about people and the environment, but having said that, we would then forget to engage. And that is something that has gained a lot of traction in the last 10 years or so, 10 to 15 years or so, but there is still much more work to be done.
Thank you very much for that answer. David, do you have more input from us now coming into the Q&A?
Yes, thank you very much to all participants. It is starting to come in. Someone is wondering if we could share good examples of what co-creation, good example of co-creation successes in that respect.
Well, good examples include the R&I days that the Commission organized last year and again in last September this year, and where we tried to co-create with not just the usual stakeholders in each area, but with the widest possible public. So those R&I days, they were physical last year and inevitably virtual this year, attracted lots of people. I suppose we still haven't reached everyone that ought to be reached, but I think that is already a good example and a new way of doing things, and to make a difference to how we developed the strategy, the orientations, as we called it, for Horizon Europe last year, and now on how we are developing the work programs. That is a good example. The other group of examples, of course, are projects like yours or the other projects I mentioned, and still there is a lot of work to be done. And we are all willing to listen about suggestions about new ways of doing this. And already we have some good examples on which we can build.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I hope that we will also be able to share a good example later today and in the next coming sessions. David, what else is coming in?
Yeah, so there are a number of questions around the role of various stakeholders in the co-creation process, and one, for example, asks, who should instigate co-creation? Should it be an initiative from industry, from research, or from other stakeholder groups?
think we all have a responsibility and a role to play in that. So the policymakers need to put the mechanisms in place, and like we are trying to do. The beneficiaries of grants need to look more to look beyond their own work. And there, of course, scientists or technologists differ enormously. Some have a natural gift in communication, others do not. So we need more communicators, and not everyone can be a communicator. But certainly we need more of that, and that applies particularly, but not only, of course, to those who benefit from Horizon Europe or framework program grants. Then, of course, there are people who already have this kind of role, NGOs, and they need to continue to play it. And finally, all that would not be enough if people themselves are not interested. So even if you provide all the tools and all the opportunities, if people either don't know or are not interested or don't know where to go, then of course the whole enterprise of engagement will be compromised. And often, of course, we see that when we do communicate, the people who come to us to express their views may be not the usual players, but still they are very far from being a representative cross-section of society. Is that not the case? And there I don't have an answer, but we all need to do better in that regard. I remember when I was a research scientist in nuclear fusion, I did spend much of my time, at least 10%, I would say, on communication activities. And of course, nuclear fusion is something that is rather remote, but also very interesting, at least very interesting for those who have read something about it. And so we had many people came to us who wanted to know more about it, and it was always a pleasure to explain both how it worked and what its impacts might be. So, but we need a lot of that, and we need many players for it.
Thank you very much. Now there is a cluster of questions focusing on the future and the articulation between co-creation and the project, the Horizon 2020 project. And maybe I'm going to try to lump them together so you can address that. One of the first question is whether citizen engagement is going to be a hard requirement in the future calls on this theme. Another one is what role do you see for social science and humanities in this part of Horizon Europe? And then there is one maybe a little more focused on one particular engagement project, which is why is industry and citizens not involved in your Horizon Europe partnerships such as PARC for chemical risk assessment? Shouldn't all stakeholders engagement be mandatory? So I try to group them together, but feel free to separate them and just pick them apart if it makes more sense for your response.
All right, and please remind me if I don't deal with all three issues. So the first one, the quick answer to the first question is no. It will not be. There will not be a hard requirement to have social sciences and humanities in all projects. That would be unworkable and probably counterproductive. But as in the past, we will have several activities, dedicated activities, where you will need the social sciences and humanities. And also, increasingly, we see a role for social sciences and humanities in more and more projects. But again, we don't want to have a blanket requirement that anyone and everyone who is a beneficiary and does a project should have do social sciences and humanities, because apart from the fact that it would not go down that well, it would not be that productive, because people would do lip service to social sciences and humanities. They would include the token social scientist in their projects just to say they have included it. So when we do include it, we try to think about what impacts we expect to come out of it. So that should help proposers at the proposal stage in designing this the involvement of social sciences and humanities, and in attracting the right type of social sciences and humanities. So that's not entirely new, this approach. That is what we have been doing in Horizon 2020, but we intend to intensify it, including in areas where one might have thought that there were not natural homes for social sciences and humanities. Now you could not do it in any and every research on materials, for example. If you do research on catalysts, it's research on catalysts, and that's that. On the other hand, if you do research on the circular economy or smart manufacturing, there is a natural role for social scientists and the humanities to engage with people in one way or another, and to make sure that the technologies will be taken up and that they will be understood. Obviously, in artificial intelligence is another very good area. So that's the first question, and I think that to some extent answers the second part of your question about what role we see for social sciences and humanities. Does it not? We don't simply want them to be there. Incidentally, sometimes it is understood that way, and it is obviously the wrong way. We don't want simply to support social scientists and humanists, what do you call them? We want them to be effective in the whole edifice of research and innovation. So that is why we increasingly will be thinking about the impact, not about whether there is a home where they can be active in a number of projects, but what we expect them to achieve. And from what I know, for example, I was at a conference on the social sciences and humanities in Vienna 2 years ago. That is also what that community wants. They don't just want to be funded, they want to be effective in shaping policy and in shaping technologies. And so we want to help them to do that. And then the last part of the question, you will have to remind me, because you mentioned a particular platform of which I'm not familiar. So could you remind me what exactly the question was?
Sure. So the question applied specifically, or was originally phrased around the PARC project, partnership for chemical risk assessment, but then was clarified later in another question that it would actually apply to risk governance in NMBP 13 as well.
Right. I must admit, I'm not familiar with that particular one. When it comes to risk assessment, which is of course relevant to nanotechnology, there is a technical aspect and there is a human aspect. One is just the nitty-gritty work of understanding the effects of nanoparticles, for example. And as you know, there is an awful lot of that. A very large part of the nanotechnology spending has gone to what we call nano safety for people and the environment. Then there is the engagement part, which is linked to everything else I already talked about, which is, and that you know better than I do, which is about communicating the risks as well as the benefits in nanotechnology or any other technology like AI. I know this doesn't answer the question fully, but I just want to stress that there are two aspects to risk assessment, the technical part and the communication part.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. I think we're getting close to the closing time, wrapping up time, but maybe can finalize our conversation with two comments that were made with a relatively direct question. So the two comments that were made was that, first of all, co-creation activities and social engagement are indeed crucial to face local challenges and provide solutions such as manufacturing and exploitation of local resources. And also someone pointed that stakeholder engagement is not necessarily co-creation. Co-creation is coming to an inclusive solution of the project. And so in that respect, maybe we can finish with a final question that was put forward on whether the Commission is planning specific tools to boost these types of co-creation activities on site, not just project, but actual concrete co-creation activities.
To be quite honest, I cannot give you a wide-ranging answer because there may be activities like that that I'm not aware of. So I don't want to give an answer that may be wrong, but it's a very interesting question. When it comes to our part of the work, the digital industry and space, the answer is yes. We want to do things in new ways, and we will have activities that will try to do exactly that. And now we are designing the topic, so it's a bit early to talk about it. But yes, we do want to do this engagement in new ways. And I think as the projects unfold, and as the present projects unfold, as well as the initial projects of Horizon Europe, we will all learn more from those projects, and we will have new ideas about how to do things in the future. That's all I can say about that now. And that said, there may well be activities like that in other parts of Horizon Europe, or even existing activities that I'm unaware of.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. And Lisa, I think I'm going to give you the floor back.
Yes, thank you very much, Nicholas Deliyanakis, and thank you very much, David, for this, Nicholas, for this very interesting presentation, and both of you for this highly interesting and enlightening discussion as well here towards the end of the talk. Thank you very much for that. Now we have a little bit of an energizer. We have what we call a movie emoji quiz. And we hope that you will like it and think that it's a fun activity. It is in Slido. And after the next 4 minutes, you have 4 minutes to fill the quiz. I will announce which one of you are the best in transforming emojis into movie titles. Please go ahead. And there the quiz is now. Now, thank you everyone very much for taking part in this movie emoji quiz. And I would like to congratulate Roger as the winning participant with 6 out of 6 correct. And on second place, well, actually, there's quite a tie here. I see Roger was the fastest with 6 out of 6. But several of you have also answered all of the questions correctly. Sabine, David, Nicholas, and Paul. Congratulations, everyone, and I hope you enjoyed it. Now, it is my pleasure to transition to the second talk of the session and tell you a little bit about the GoNano-project. Before I begin, again, I would like to encourage you to use the Slido Q&A to ask your questions during the session. I will also introduce 3 actions in Slido during my talk, where I will ask you some questions from me, and I will check your responses to those questions as I go along. And again, at the end of the presentation, together with David, as we just did, we will check your questions in Slido and have a Q&A. Now, the GoNano-project. The GoNano-project has been a 3-year project with the goal of showing a process through which citizens and private professional stakeholders like researchers, policymakers, consumer representatives can collaborate, create, and discuss ideas for future nanotechnologies and create suggestions that take into account societal needs and values. You might ask why we wanted to do this, why this project? Well, we created this project from a belief that complex issues such as climate change and better management and treatment of diseases, they cannot be solved by isolated innovation in academia, in industry and business alone. Innovation and change, it must be a joint process, and it must involve experts from civil society, policy, business, academia, and citizens, together developing a deeper understanding of the issues, the opportunities, and the needs and the solutions to changing our present-day activities together. Now, in our project, we set out on a journey to see how we could do this in practice. We ran pilot projects in 3 countries. We focused on nanotechnologies in relation to health in the Netherlands, food in the Czech Republic, and energy in Spain. Next question is, how did we then do it? You see here on the slide actually already the 4 steps of the combined co-creation and citizen engagement process that we ran in the GoNano-project. We started our process with face-to-face citizen workshops. In those workshops, our goal was to discover the needs, the values, and concerns of European citizens in relation to future visions of nanotechnologies. We then took the outcomes of these workshops and we presented them to a mixed group of stakeholders, from public research, from industry, from civil society, and they, in those workshops, co-created together, based on that the presentations of needs and values, suggestions for how they could be incorporated or related to their research projects. Again, then the third step was that these suggestions were put to citizens in an online survey that then voted on the different ideas to let the stakeholders know which ones they supported the most. The results of the online survey was then taken into a 4th step, where the stakeholders worked hard together to co-create as concrete as possible suggestions for how future nanotechnologies in these 3 different areas, health, energy, and food, could look like if taking into account the needs and values of citizens. So that was our process in a nutshell. Now I want to present you with some of the central insights that we found through running this combined co-creation and engagement process. First off, our first central finding is that facilitating and guiding such a process and interaction between different types of stakeholders and citizens actually can lead to novel suggestions on how to integrate societal needs and values. And I will give you a concrete example later in my talk. We also found that a very central element and what is very important is that you need to realize that it's a process of mutual learning. I think Nicholas also mentioned the concept of mutual learning in his presentation, but that such a process of mutual learning takes time and needs to be nurtured. You are inviting experts, researchers, citizens with very different backgrounds, working in very different contexts, and all having to learn to understand and speak with each other. And once you have then realized a good dialogue, then that is not even enough actually, because you need to, from that dialogue, also make a step to action to actually change things in practice. And that is then an additional challenge. Finally, we found that going through this process, we realized that if going forward there is to be an added emphasis on research and innovation needing to respond or to incorporate societal needs and values, then it's very important to consider carefully the opportunities for doing this. There has to be an overlap between the desire to engage and co-create and opportunities for doing so. The tricky thing is that it can also be hard to realize what those opportunities are upfront, and opportunities and context and landscapes might change as your project moves on its own trajectory. Finally, we have 3 key pieces of advice for anyone else who would like to start a co-creation process. It is, in our opinion, central that you address the interests and motivations of all the involved participants. So when you start up a co-creation process, you need to think carefully about the different types of stakeholders, citizen groups that you invite and that you want to engage. And you have to understand what their interests and what their motivations are and make sure that they are addressed in your co-creation process. Then you need to realize that if you're facilitating such a process, you have the job of translating between many different needs and concerns at different levels of abstraction from different stakeholders. And that is also a demanding job. Finally, your key job will be really to help the participants in the process also explore where connection points are between, for example, abstract values like sustainability and a concrete research project or program. And it has to be an exploration that at a certain point becomes concrete enough to be translated into a proposal for action. Now, before I move on to the next slide, I would like to invite you to my first action in Slido. The question that I would like to ask is, what is preventing you from co-creating more with persons outside of your own field of expertise? I will check back with this word cloud in a minute. The next item that I wanted to introduce you to from the GoNano-project is a knowledge base. So before we started this 4-step combined co-creation and engagement process, we were of course prepared. And possibly some of the materials that we have collected in our knowledge base are of interest and use to you as well. The knowledge base, it contains, among other things, guidelines on how to make your process inclusive, how to consider gender equality and diversity, how to consider differences in perspectives, interests, and motivations. We also give some hints on what those differences are between different types of stakeholder groups. In addition, the knowledge database contains videos that show how you can make abstract visions of future nanotechnologies more concrete for people, lay citizens that you would like to engage with. So we did it through scenarios and found that in this way you can actually also illustrate some of the dilemmas and social and ethical issues that come up or could come up in concrete future applications of a nanotechnologies application. And we would like to invite you to explore this material further. This slide is from an interactive brochure that we made in the GoNano-project, and these videos can be clicked and watched, and there's really a lot of material to explore there. And a link should be coming up, I think, in the YouTube chat to that material. Now, I would like to, in the next step, go from this material to 3 concrete outcomes of our project. However, before I do that, let me just check this first Slido action and see what you have replied. Aha, there's a very strong collection here around resources and time. I think that matches pretty well with what our findings also were. Co-creation and engagement in the way we have done it. And actually, if you want to engage many different types of stakeholders and also citizens, you need time, you need resources, and you need support. There are also other issues being raised here. Know-how, language, motivation, access to citizens, acceptance of expertise. These are all very interesting and important points coming up here in the word cloud. Thank you very much. We will save these. Now, I wanted to introduce to you, as I said, 3 concrete outcomes from our project. The first one is a collection of white papers with policy recommendations that we developed and wrote together with some of the stakeholders that we engaged in our process. The white papers, 3 of them, they collect these policy recommendations, and the first one, white paper 1, is the one that establishes the foundation as to why co-creation and responsiveness to societal needs and values make sense in nanotechnologies. It describes the conceptual and empirical aspects of responsiveness, of researchers and engineers in co-creation processes. And this white paper mainly addresses researchers, engineers, and other stakeholders in the research system, like research funding or research institutions. The second white paper then follows up on the first. It provides a more strategic focus on how to implement co-creation, and does this in context of a consideration of the research and innovation ecosystem and how that looks like. Thus, it addresses policy, industry, business, and research institutions, and it also touches upon some of the roadblocks that you actually raised now in the word cloud. White paper 3 then finally delves into this issue of gender equality and diversity, and it provides some guidance on how to realize co-creation considering these aspects and how to better integrate consideration of these aspects in nano-related research and innovation. And the main addressees of this white paper are organizers of co-creation and engagement, researchers, and policy. Now, I cannot go into all of the recommendations in the 3 white papers right here, but I would like to just introduce you to 3 of them. From white paper 1, we have a recommendation on the need to nurture opportunities for mutual benefit. So we already now have discovered that there are some mutual benefits and that co-creation and engagement of citizens can actually lead to better outcomes. But we also found that this is resource intensive and takes time. And the recommendation that we raise is to nurture these opportunities. But the question, of course, that also leaves us with is how can we and how should we systematically nurture these spaces between actors with different kinds of expertise and with citizens. The second white paper makes the recommendation on the need to create a culture of co-creation, and somehow also follows then up with the first white paper. So what we identified also coming out in your word cloud is that there are in many places a willingness or an interest or curiosity In other places, less so, to co-create and engage with society. But researchers are experiencing that there are not a lot of support systems for wanting to create different types of research projects, or not a lot of incentive structures. So this recommendation speaks to the need to create more of a culture and better support structures for researchers and research organizations that would like to co-create or engage more with society. Finally, in white paper 3, we recommend that there become more focus on challenging implicit discrimination and gender issues in research and innovation. The question is, who has what role in addressing, for example, stereotyping, implicit discrimination, and gender issues in innovation processes? We don't answer that question, but we do suggest that you can create reflection on these issues in different ways, both by engaging stakeholders with different backgrounds, but also by using scenarios to highlight and show some of the implicit assumptions that are being made about future uses and how applications will be used in specific situations. Now, these recommendations and the more deeper discussion of them is the focus of our policy roundtable, third part of our conference on November 12th. The second concrete outcome that I want to draw your attention to is the concrete product suggestions that come out of our project. Through our process, our focus was really to try to become as concrete as possible in terms of actual research product suggestions that could come out of this process that would be different somehow because they had been exposed to these considerations on societal needs and values. In total, we had some 92 suggestions to choose from our process. In the end, we worked out 5 of these 92 ones that we could make concrete in relation to actual ongoing research. I'm going to today just show you one example. But before I do this, I would like to ask you for my second Slido action. The question is here, what is your dream outcome and what would it be if you organized a co-creation event? Again, it's a word cloud and I will check back just in a few minutes. First, I'll just introduce you to this one example. The example that I'll focus on is the suggestion to improve autonomy and well-being of diabetes patients in the data management plan for an artificial pancreas. Now, in the citizen workshops in the Netherlands, we had people collected there to talk about monitoring devices for diabetes. And they explained how these monitoring devices can actually help increase the feeling of autonomy and control of diabetes patients over their disease. The participants also in that workshop talked about, in addition to autonomy and control, the need for them to still have a healthcare professional in the loop of their treatment plan for them to feel secure and to increase their well-being. Some of the citizens from the citizen workshops were then invited to discuss with the stakeholders in the second step, the first stakeholder workshop, where they were invited to participate in the co-creation process. There they were mixed with a startup company that were working on an artificial pancreas concept. The designer's idea was that this artificial pancreas would take away the burden of diabetes from the patients by hiding the data and the health indicators that it was using to measure the status of the diabetes. But what the citizen participants managed to explain was that actually having that data, being able to follow the curve and development and the fluctuations was very important for them both for feeling well, but also for increasing their sense of control. So in that exchange led to a new suggestion for how data would be managed in the data management plan of this artificial pancreas. Again, I would like to emphasize that there is a lot more information on these concrete product suggestions in the brochure. There are some videos that introduce each of these product suggestions in more detail. Now, let me just check back with the slide of action and see what your dream outcomes are. Wow, this is really inspiring. This is actually really inspiring. Inclusive solutions is the biggest. Better solutions, unprecedented interdisciplinary collaboration, resolving opposing positions and conflicts. Yes, that is definitely something. True public engagement, commitment to uptake of its results, enough participants attending, better solutions, high level of participation by people from different backgrounds, so not just reaching the usual suspects, but actually increasing the diversity aspect. I think these are really all very, very interesting. Highly on the list, really this dream of inclusiveness and engagement. Thank you very much for these suggestions in the word cloud. We will save them. Now, before I move to the last concrete outcome of our project, I just want to introduce you to my last and final Slido action, which is the question, what do you think could be the value of engaging with citizens on research and innovation? This one is not a word cloud, but it's a multiple choice, and you can pick more options. So I'm looking forward to see what you choose. Okay, moving then on to our final and third major outcome of the project is a collection of training and capacity building materials for researchers and for engineers, for citizens and civil society organizations that would like to engage in or organize co-creative projects. And this collection that I'm showing you here is consisting of 3 parts. The first one is a sort of how-to part for researchers and engineers on how to co-create. There are some webinars that explain what is co-creation, what is engagement, how do you do it, how do you address these different interests and motivations. And then that is supported by a 6-step roadmap that guides you through the different steps of thinking about and planning and organizing and carrying out a co-creation process. Each step has in it concrete tools to help you along the way. The second part of this collection is how to get engaged guides and material for citizens and other civil society stakeholders who would like to engage with researchers. And finally, the collection also contains our experiences with introducing these ideas of co-creation and citizen engagement to a group of students and early career researchers, and their ideas, thoughts, and reactions to doing more of this in the future. Again, I would like to really encourage you to explore this material in more detail in the brochure and also on our website, because there's a lot of rich information there, videos, interviews, and so forth. And you can find it all in the brochure and on our website. Now, let's see what you answered here in the final Slido event. Many of you, 56%, citizens could raise awareness on their needs for how technological solutions should be designed. That is definitely one of the things that the citizen participants did in the GoNano-project. Think just of this example that I just provided you with the artificial pancreas. Second and third combined, citizens could challenge how research understand a problem, and all of the above. Actually, Yes, citizens could help develop research questions. Oh, that one is less popular. It's changing a little bit. 55, 50, some of you are changing your mind perhaps. But I think we through this GoNano-project, and probably my consortium would agree also through other projects that we have been involved in, most of us would answer that citizen engagement can actually help with all of the above. But it's very interesting to see that the biggest group here is raise awareness on needs for how solutions should be designed. Thank you very much for participating in this action. Now, that was it. If you want to know more and see more, here are some links both to our websites, Facebook or Twitter, and our LinkedIn. Now I would like to invite David back to see what kind of questions we have had come in to the Q&A during my presentation. Thank you very much for all your input here already in the Slido actions.
Thanks very much, Lisa, and thanks all of you for continuing to participate in this, and thanks, Lisa, for presenting and giving justice to the work, to the collective work that we did here. There was one question that that came up in the Slido poll for now about the presentation, and it was asking you whether you can think of any questions, issues, or areas where co-creation would be less suitable or less fruitful, or would be less likely to reach a successful outcome or desired outcome, I guess.
Okay, thank you very much, David, for that that question. It's a very good question. It's also a little bit of a challenging question, of course. But I think an example that I would introduce as an example where co-creation might make little sense is in cases where many decisions have already been made, like on how a product will look like, or how a research trajectory of technology will develop. So in a situation where you're already rather far down the road of how things are going to look like, then in that specific case, it might make less sense because a lot of decisions have already been made, and it's hard to redo some design decisions, for example, once you have already gotten way down the trajectory and investments have already been made. So probably in that situation, I would say it's not such a good idea. It's also, I think, a challenge if, but that depends on your focus level. If you're very early, for example, in a development, it can also be hard to be concrete about what could the opportunities be. But then again, that then opens space for creativity. But cases where, developments are very early demands also some of the facilitators. But I think there are some good tools out there that can help to speculate in a controlled way about some ways in which developments could develop, and even if they take different directions, a reflective and a good discussion about opportunities, about desired directions, I think is always worthwhile.
Thanks very much, Lisa. And questions are a bit slow to come up for this presentation. So maybe it's because the presentation is so clear, so overwhelming that people are not sure. But I will, waiting for others to chip in their question. I have a question for you. Actually, a quite direct and a little personal question. I'm curious, what was the most surprising finding for you in the project? We've been developing this project, and you've been overseeing this for close to 3 years now. And I was curious about what was the most, surprising or striking outcome that you were maybe not expecting from the project.
Again, it's a very good question, David. I'm not sure if there's something that really surprised me. I mean, I was happily surprised actually that we managed to do as much as we managed to do in the concrete product suggestion cases, because that was a big challenge that we put for ourselves and the project, to come up with these concrete product suggestions. I think many projects before us have stayed a bit more on the abstract level, talking, more in general about like what we would like. We of course all want to, have better technologies that don't discriminate. We would like to have better practices in terms of, our environmental management. We want sustainability, we want green, we want all of those things. But we set out to try to make these ideas concrete in actual practices and in relation to people's actual research projects or research programs and ideas. And I think that was a big challenge and a big ambition. And in that way, I was positively surprised actually that we managed to actually come up with some ideas there, and some actual change happened because of the processes that we ran.
Okay, thanks very much. And I'm glad we took the time to look at this, because then questions are now flowing in. And I know that there is one that we have discussed quite a bit, or that has been the topic of some discussion within the project. And one is about, how do we relate co-creation to RRI, Responsible Research and Innovation, GoNano? Do you consider that co-creation is a way to the larger or wider goal of RRI, or how do these different terms relate to one another?
Oh, I'm a little bit afraid of becoming too theoretical to embrace the whole audience, but I would say that first of all, co-creation and RI are not the same. And my take on this is that co-creation is an approach to try to put into action some of the ideas that you find in the RI is Responsible Research and Innovation framework. But of course, this framework is much more than just co-creative practices, and it also, depending on even who you ask, can mean different things. Are you asking an academic, or are you asking a policymaker? There are different things that they would like you to focus on. Asking academics, for example, you have to realize a whole process where you start with really foresight exercises and anticipatory exercises, thinking about possible future trajectories, implications, issues that could arise, and try to, in this time, do something about the developmental trajectories that you do not want. You have to engage really in reflective processes with different kinds of stakeholders, and you have to eventually also be part of acting on them. But a different way of looking at this is to say that what we really need to focus on in future development of research and innovation are some focus areas, like, for example, public engagement, or gender equality and diversity, and even also education, like science education, making the general level of knowledge of science and society higher, in order to counter, for example, misinformation and misunderstanding of what science is and is about, and how to understand communication coming out from the sciences. So there's a wide range of takes, I think, on the Responsible Research and Innovation framework, and therefore also a wide variety of tools and approaches towards which you can approach that paradigm. And co-creation has with another history also as well, outside of the Responsible Research and Innovation paradigm. So it's also a practice in various industries and businesses, and so it's not necessarily coming from the Responsible Research and Innovation realm, but it can be used, I think, to realize some of the goals of the RRI framework, like, for example, more engagement and interaction and joint exploration of opportunities.
Well, thanks a lot. Okay, I see we're getting close to closure time. There were two questions that I think were relevant, and I will let you choose which one you think is most relevant, as you have only time to respond to one question. But one I think can be straightforward. One is, were the tool developed by GoNano designed to be used for any particular audience? And that, I think, can be a pretty straightforward answer. So I'll try to cram in another question under the nose of our timekeeper, which is, what are useful incentives for citizens and stakeholders to participate in co-creation?
What are useful incentives? I think this last one is actually a question that I would like to invite others also to think about. Because right now, when we invite people or citizens to participate in our processes, they do so actually offering, in most cases, their free time to participate in them. And it makes it hard for certain groups also to take part in these processes, because either they have to take time off from work, they have to have their children taken care of, and also there is a way in which these processes are run that makes it sometimes hard for specific audiences to participate. So sometime is maybe it's worth to reflect a little bit more on incentive structures, but it's also challenging because you want citizens to be representative to a certain degree of the general population. So you don't want, for example, professional citizen participants who are paid to go from event to event. So it's a really good question. I mean, the way that we have solved it so far in amongst us practitioners also who are part of many public engagement projects is to make sure that we make the event and the process as attractive as possible by hosting in attractive places and in time slots where we think the most people can participate. But it's something I think to think about further in the future.
Thanks very much. And I think now it's time to check up with our graphic designer, Soren. And while everything is put in place, I want to just point out one of the question, almost rhetorical question that was put in the chat as a final question, which is very close to my heart and which to me expands a little the discussion that we have, which is, shouldn't be the goal of co-creation to give citizens the capacity to collectively decide for what research is their money used? And I don't think this is something that our projects are in a position to respond to. I think this is a much larger societal question, but I do think that this is at least at the heart of a number of ours engagement into this particular project and into more largely speaking, other co-creation processes, is to have a chance to reconnect citizens with what the tax money is being used for, and to reconnect citizens with the research and outcome of the research, and link that, as was mentioned by Nicholas at the beginning, with larger societal values and societal issues. And so I just thought it was interesting to finish with this question / comment, basically.
Certainly, I think that's a very, very important question that looms somehow in the background of all of these activities that we undertake. Thank you, David, for raising that. And now let's check in with Søren, our art director, to see how he has been doing with transforming our talk into a graphic illustration. Søren, can you please share your screen?
Yes, I'll do that. And it's been very inspiring to listen to you. And here we go. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, it's blank.
Yes. First I had Nicholas, and I ended up here. Where does can you see it?
We see it, yes.
Yes, thank you. And it's when I hear you talk, it's like I do visual notes when I'm in a meeting and so forth. So kind of like when I hear certain things get repeated and so forth. So this is where I ended up, and it's my visual notes on Nicholas's speak.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, you went on, Lisa, and I ended up kind of here.
Okay.
So it can be adjusted if needed.
No, I mean, if you just go back to Nicholas's presentation, there are some elements that I think we all recognize. David, I hope you also recognize all of these different key enabling technologies. The clusters are there 2020, that's now. We are transitioning towards the future. We have some visions for how this transition should take place.
And there are two things that strike me looking at this. One that is from the visual side, which are really like, it's the multiplication of circular symbols. You have the Earth, you have the stars from the EU flag, you have the arrows for the circular economy. Even in the cluster, the way they're organized, there is this sort of circular flow, which I think gives the drawing a good sense of what we've been discussing. And what I find also very interesting is that question mark next to the finish line, because indeed this has been a lot of how we've been discussing. There is no finish line. This is an ongoing process. This is something that develops, and there is a constant reconsidering of what is the objective that we're trying to achieve, and how do we adjust the different tools and the different mechanism that we put in place to adjust to this moving goal and to this moving, changing line. So I think it is very simple. It is put very simply, but it very accurately, it goes at the heart of something that is really core to what we're doing. So thank you, Nicholas. Nicholas, and sorry.
Thank you very much, David and Søren. And I can see that from our chat that Nicholas is also happy with this summary of this talk. Brilliant. Thank you very much. So we are having, I think, to move into a very small break. It's basically just for us to be able to take a little bit of a nature break. And then we will be back in 5 minutes with the next session. The break is, as I said, very short. And after this break, you can stop sharing your screen now, I think. With the, yes, screens, cameras, microphones. Yes, many thanks. So we will have a very short break, as I said, and then the next session will start in 5 minutes on gender and diversity in research. That one is hosted by our GoNano partner, Vanessa Moore from the European Institute of Women's Health. And the speaker to help us with this important topic is Anne Pépin, Senior Policy Officer of the Gender Section of DG Research and Innovation with the European Commission. We're very much looking forward to seeing you back in just a few minutes. Thank you very much for your participation in this first session, and see you in a little bit. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I hope that you had a time to have a little bit of a break and refresh, and you're now ready to transition to the second topic of our conference today, which is gender and diversity in research and innovation. And now I would like to give the floor to my co-host and host of this session, Vanessa Moore from the European Institute of Women's Health. Vanessa, the floor is yours.
Hi, Lisa. Thanks so much for that. So thanks, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Vanessa Moore. I'm from the European Institute of Women's Health. Like Lisa said, we're delighted to be hosting this session of this conference. So far, we haven't had any technical problems, so fingers crossed it'll keep going like that for this session. So just briefly, this session will start with me just giving an overview of gender and diversity in the GoNano-project, and then it'll be followed by a talk by Dr. Anne Pépin from the DG Research and Innovation in the European Commission, where she's the Senior Policy Officer in the gender sector. We'll then have a short break, which will be followed by a Q&A session. You've met our moderator, David, so he'll be moderating all the questions coming in throughout the hour. So please keep the questions coming, go to Slido, write everything up that you can think of throughout the session, and hopefully we'll get to most of your questions. We'd really value questions and feedback, so don't be shy. We've also posted a question already on Slido just to get a little bit of an insight, whether you think gender and diversity is an issue in nanotechnology. Maybe you don't think it is, maybe you do. So go to Slido and have a look. And we'll discuss all of the results of the Slido and then the questions, of course, after the two presentations. So I'll start now with my presentation. Let me just see if I can share it. One moment, that should work. Share, yes, and yes, I think we are in business. Yes, okay, great. So so just a very quick overview of the European Institute of Women's Health. Health NGO launched in 1996. We advocate for a gender-sensitive approach to health and research, policy, prevention, treatment and care in order to reduce health inequalities and improve quality. It's an extensive multinational, multidisciplinary network, and we're also guided very much by our expert advisory board. One of our kind of big tasks is to try to increase health literacy and women's health. We do that through policy briefs. We've produced quite a large number of policy briefs on various health issues, chronic diseases, for example, and how they differ in women and in men and what the knock-on effect of that is. Issues such as safe use of medicines during pregnancy, prevention issues, health prevention, and then important health issues for women, like vaccination, for example. All of this is available on our website if you want to go and have a look. So that's us. So our involvement then in GoNano. One of the main objectives of GoNano was to create an engagement process that was kind of cognizant of gender diversity, culture and communication traditions. So in order to align nanotechnology R&I with these societal needs, it's very important to look at issues like gender and diversity because they're all very much part of society, and to focus on these areas presents really an opportunity to get a deeper insight into kind of what is it that motivates opinions, thoughts, differences in outlook. What precisely is it? What information and knowledge can we get from these kind of divergences of opinions that might appear, and also differences in discourse? And what can we actually gain? Like what's the benefit to do all this? So with that in mind, as one of the main objectives of GoNano, the creators of the project commissioned this deliverable, which the AWH were partly responsible for, with a long and heavy title, Understanding the Role of Culture, Gender and Communications Traditions and Their Implications for Engagement Methodologies, Communication and Dissemination. A bit of a mouthful, but basically we conducted an extensive literature review and also an online social media analysis on those issues. So I'm just going to speak briefly about what we actually found in the literature review. So not really surprising, women are underrepresented in STEM and in nanotechnology. They're underrepresented on really all levels. There's an issue with, it increases very much with the level of occupational hierarchy in STEM. So, where the women tend to be, where they are women, they tend to be clustered in low ranking positions. And this has proven to be the case in both the United States and Europe. So basically, the further up the hierarchical ladder you go, the less women there are. Also, it's very much a structural issue. For example, just to kind of give an illustration of what does a structural issue actually mean. Women who are working in STEM are just as effective as men in scientific collaboration. But structural underrepresentation means that women, they start from a disadvantage in terms of collaboration ties and then access to strategic information. A lot of times, collaboration and kind of networking and things like that, women aren't, maybe because there's fewer of them, there's not that many connections to make. You tend to kind of collaborate more with maybe people that you have worked with before. So it kind of becomes a vicious circle, really. And the end result of all this is that core values and assumptions in STEM fields, which includes nanotechnology, has really been fundamentally shaped by men and male norms. And I suppose the main issue with that really is that it doesn't really reflect the lived reality of any society. Just as an example, our literature review found very strongly that there's different attitudes towards risk when it comes to nanotechnology between men and women. Men are more willing to tolerate nano-related risks. They're not as concerned about kind of knock-on effects. Even in studies that have looked at nanotechnology scientists, male and female, female scientists are more likely to kind of recognize potential downstream effects on consumers of certain nanotechnology developments, which were kind of, thrown caution to the wind on the other side. So it just goes to show how important it is to kind of include everything, because then you get more of a balance. So in terms of diversity then, diversity is quite often forgotten a little bit. Gender is pushed a lot, but diversity is equally important. Sometimes they get put together, which they shouldn't really be. Just because you include gender doesn't mean that you're diverse. You have to have the both of them are both binaries are really important. Diversity can be a difficult term to define. Does it refer to ethnicity? Is it sexual orientation? Is it age? Is it ability? Religion, social class, education? There's all these social categories that make up diversity. STEM, as we know, tends to be overwhelmingly male, but also overwhelmingly white, Asian to a certain extent, but mainly very white. Just again, a snapshot from our literature review, one study in 2016 in the US, a team there analyzed responses to a postal survey that they sent out to leading nanoscientists in the US. Their response rate was 32%, which is fairly good for a postal survey. Of the responses, an overwhelming amount, so nearly 96% were white or Asian. So the division there was 64% was white and 32% Asian. So overwhelmingly white, quite a lot of Asians. Only 2% were Hispanic and 0.5% were African American. So they really extremely skewed in the makeup. And so then you say to yourself, okay, well, if that's the scenario, how do we create diversity when you have all these different categories? Just including a woman on the team, does that kind of tick the diversity box, even if she's from a privileged middle-class background? Or is a team more diverse if it includes a privileged middle-class man, but it comes from a minority background? Do you tick the box then? So, how can you actually approach this in a practical manner? To do that, it's really important to look at how all these social identities intersect with each other. a lot of you might be familiar with the concept of intersectionality. It's a bit of a buzzword at the moment. So intersectionality is the interaction between gender, race, and then these categories like sexual education, sexual orientation, age, ability, and then the outcomes of these interactions in terms of the power structure. So they all influence each other, and they kind of make up then your previous experiences, what you kind of bring with you, and again, how you relate to this power structure. So that's really important to keep in mind when it comes to diversity. So gender and diversity then, what happens when they're missing is that a scientific community is just not that likely to actually consider the needs and concerns of all the groups that might be affected by future nanotechnology. You tend to just kind of look at your own immediate surroundings. Lack of inclusion of gender and diversity has a knock-on effect of science and research, and there's a multitude of study and a lot of research done around this. And increased diversity in the workplace has been proven to create more innovation and more awareness of societal concerns. It's the old thinking outside the box. Diversity kind of pushes people to think differently because you come from different perspectives. Having a diversity in gender included will mean that policymakers, for example, they'll have more diversity of experts to reach out to when they're designing policies connected to, for example, nanotechnology. Also, encouraging diversity creates what they call an innovation dividend for scientific organizations. So again, a lot of studies have proved that more diversity actually leads to smarter and more creative teams that have more new discoveries. Again, this kind of more innovation focused thinking comes with differences of opinions. So including more diversity in the workplace really creates scientists that are much more aware of societal concerns, which, as we know, is an essential part of effective dialogue. So when we were armed with all this information, the GoNano consortium, we kind of sat down and thought, okay, how can we make sure to include all this in our co-creation methodology? So the methodology very much included gender and diversity in the workshops that were held in the Netherlands, Spain, and the Czech Republic. I think it's next week that the conference is going to discuss these workshops in more detail. So definitely make sure to attend next week as well. You'll hear more about it, and it's absolutely fascinating. But so what we did in practice was that to make sure to include gender and diversity throughout the co-creation process, really from the very basics in the beginning, the information material for the citizen workshops, we made sure that that kind of had differing gender, turn the gender identities upside down, include, there were vignettes that would have included people of different ethnicities or, non-traditional families, these kind of just, different outlooks. The same with the content material in the workshops. The recruitment criteria for the workshop, so this was very important. They were aimed to get a gender and diversity amongst the citizens that attended, so to make sure that there was a gender balance and to try to get as much diversity as possible amongst the citizens. So, urban, rural, educational attainment, these kind of things, just to, again, to get more of a differing sample. And also to really try to observe as much as possible the dynamics between the citizens in the workshops. The tables were set up to have a gender balance, and the moderators were kind of, the moderators, they received training specifically on gender diversity to ask probing questions, to kind of highlight dimensions of gender and diversity in relation to anything nano related, or when they were discussing certain things to insert little probing questions basically in the conversations as and when was needed, and to really observe the dynamics, like did it make a difference? Was there a difference? What was it all about? And very interestingly, our Czech colleagues, they might be talking about it next week, I'm not sure, but one dynamic that they observed, for example, was that in terms of gender, they didn't really notice a difference at all. It was, it was nothing to notice, but they did notice that there was a difference in terms of opinions and kind of the outlook of the issue that they were talking about in people from different educational backgrounds. So again, it just goes to show, if you had focused only on the gender, you wouldn't really have had any difference, wouldn't have had any discussion, whereas the different educations was actually the stronger kind of the stronger denominator that made discussion. So again, it really illustrates how important both of these are. What they also did as well, there was stakeholders that participated in the co-creation workshop. The consortium was very conscious of trying to achieve a balanced panel of stakeholders to avoid what they call a manel, a panel that's only men. It's difficult again in nanotechnology because it's very male dominated, but to really make an effort to get it as balanced as possible. So with all that, I think we really achieved something. I think it was really successful, and we achieved something really good in including this in the methodology from the beginning. If we hadn't done that, we would just have, you can't really do it afterwards. You have to do it from the beginning. You have to include everything throughout the entire process, and again, being aware of it even when you look at the results afterwards. So I think, just in the interest of time now, I'll just move on instead. I'll see if I can stop sharing here. Hang on. So that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the GoNano contributions to gender and diversity, but just to give a little bit of an insight anyway. But I won't keep you any longer from our main speaker. So we have Pépin, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, who at quite short notice agreed to speak. So really appreciative of you, and thank you so much for attending. So just a bit of an introduction to Anne. She's the Senior Policy Officer in the gender sector of the European Commission's DG Research and Innovation. She holds a PhD in physics electronics, and she was recruited by the French National Centre for Scientific Research in 1996. She was awarded their bronze medal in 2003 for her contributions to nanotechnology. And in 2012, she was appointed director of their Mission pour la place de la femme in CNRS. I apologize for my French pronunciation. In 2017, she went on leave from CNRS and instead joined DG Research and Innovation, where she is now as policy officer. So really looking forward to hearing this. So over to you, Anne.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. I'm trying to share my presentation. Do you see it? Let me know if you see it. Vanessa, can you tell me? I can't hear anything.
We can see you. We can see the presentation, and we can hear you. Go ahead.
Oh, great. Thank you very much. Yes, well, it's a real pleasure to be here, albeit virtually in this GoNano conference. Like Vanessa recalled, I've done research in nanotechnology almost for 15 years before getting involved into gender equality issues. And so really, I'll try to give you an overview of the European Union's policy on gender equality in research and innovation, and also to engage with you into a discussion and focusing on the nano domain. And it's also a pleasure because Nicholas was talking about momentum in a different context, but it's really now at the European Commission a momentum for gender equality. It's very high on the political agenda. As you can see here, there's a firm commitment from the President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. She really wants to promote gender equality and a union of equality. There's the first ever Commissioner for Equality, Elena Dalli, and our own commissioner, so Maria Gabriel, Commissioner for Innovation, Research, Culture, Education, and Youth, is very much committed. She was also very committed in her previous responsibility with digital, and she is very much for this new portfolio. And there's a cross-cutting task force on equality. So it's really a whole new framework that's strengthened, let's say. And already within the first 100 days of this new commission, a new strategy for gender equality was adopted on the 5th of March, which addresses all fields, all policies by the European Commission, but that strongly highlights the role of research and innovation, and highlights what we will be doing in Horizon Europe. In particular, it already sets the tone for the strengthening and the reinforced push for gender equality that's in Horizon Europe, by mentioning the possibility to require from applicants to the program that they have a gender equality plan in place. There's also a mention of the efforts by the European Innovation Council, including new initiatives for increasing the number of women-led technology startups. And there's a focus on the need for knowledge development and helping decrease inequalities through gender studies and intersectional research. And now you know what intersectionality means, so I won't delve too much into this, but say that for the Commission, it's gender equality policies opening to intersection with other social categories and other grounds for discrimination, such as ethnicity, disability, sexual orientation, like Vanessa mentioned. There's also a specific highlight on digitalization and potential gender biases in an AI. So this is also a topic for Cluster 4 that Nicolas Deliyanakis presented earlier, and efforts in trying to debunk gender stereotypes in all social, economic, and cultural domains. So this will be supported through Horizon Europe and also through the European Innovation Council. So our new framework now is actually the European research area, and we have a new framework, a new communication that was adopted on the 30th of September, which builds upon an earlier communication in 2012 that had set gender equality and gender mainstreaming as a priority for the Union, and with three main objectives: gender equality in careers at all levels, gender balance in decision making, and the integration of the gender dimension into research and innovation content. And Vanessa touched upon a little bit about this gender perspective. And this is both taking into account sex, biological differences, and also socio-cultural differences, so gender related, and taking into account gender equality objectives in the research design and the way it's carried out and the way who it will benefit to and potential applications. So in the new framework for the European research area, really it's realizing that there are persisting gender inequalities, really only 24% women in top academic position. I'll come back later to some figures, and very low in innovation, only 10% among patent holders, an increase of the recognition of gender-based violence in the academic system, just as in many other areas of society, and a low integration still of the sex and gender-based analysis into research and innovation content. So the new action here is to build on Horizon Europe, the strengthened objectives there, to work with member states and stakeholder organizations to promote inclusive gender equality plans. And when we use inclusive, it's really for us 3-dimension intersectionality with other social categories, but also opening to the innovation, the private sector, the entrepreneurship sector, and inclusiveness at the geographic level. So this is our framework now. And a few figures regarding the state of play on women in research and innovation. You may know that every 3 years we publish a leaflet. It's more like quite significant publication on the state of play in education, in the workforce, also in science productivity. I already mentioned the patents, but also the integration of the gender dimension in publications. The latest edition is the 2018. You have here all the links, and the current one that we're working on is the one that will be released next year. So she figures 2021. Just a few highlights. Well, as was already mentioned earlier by Vanessa, the higher you go in the hierarchy, the less women you have. It's almost parity if we could take all domains, almost parity at PhD level. Overall, it's 33% women among researchers in the EU, but at top level in the academic ladder, so full professorships, it's 24%. And it's only a small increase with respect to the figure 3 years before. And among heads of higher education institutions, it's 22%. And you will see here what we call the scissors diagram, but actually in the case of science and engineering, it's not even scissors. You don't have a higher proportion of women at bachelor level. Already here, you can see in science and engineering, it's 32% of women at bachelor level. It's actually better slightly at PhD level. And then the higher you go into the hierarchy, the less women you find, and it's 15% in these fields at the highest grade A level. If we look at the women's participation in Horizon 2020, our current framework program here, I focused on those areas that are most related to the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, so the STEM fields. In the future and emerging technology, overall workforce in projects, 32% women. Among researchers, it's 26, and women among the coordinators, it's only 19. And it's also very low for the ICT projects, but for the NMBP that Nicholas mentioned earlier, it's quite higher, 41% in the workforce, 36% among researchers, and 34 among coordinators. And this may also be related to the fact that biotechnology is in that part of the program. So now, Horizon 2020, which activities that we support, fund to support gender equality in research and innovation organization. This is what is done under the part of the program called Science with and for Society, SWAFS. And here you have a timeline of every work program year since the beginning of Horizon 2020, and the projects, gender-related projects that we have been funding under that strand. The core of our funding is for the implementation of gender equality plan in research and organization, research performing, including universities, and research funding, increasingly, research organization. And you can see in green here, all the acronyms of all the GEP projects, we call them, Gender Equality Plan projects. Most of them address science STEM fields, involve organizations that do STEM, and many of those do nanoscience and nanotechnology. For example, the Genera project was focusing on physics And it involved among partners Max Planck, the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology, or else the National Research Council in Italy, that all do some nanotechnology research. The Libra project is involving 10, now it's finished, but involving 10 life science centers, most of them in microbiology and biotech. So, and that includes the Institut Curie in France, the Center for Genomic Regulation in Barcelona, or else in the University of Copenhagen, the Biotech Research and Innovation Center. So some nanoscience there as well, but I will focus on one that has actually a nanotechnology partner as such. But before giving you some example of what they have put in their gender equality plan, let me also mention that in addition to these projects that actually give money to implement action and do that in a collaborative way, we have also supporting projects, more policy oriented or more developing trainings on gender equality and R&I, or developing communities of practice of organizations that want to implement or are implementing gender equality plans. Some projects are also more at the national level with national partners, national representatives such as Gender Action or the GenderNet Plus Aranet Co-Fund, and the Granted project, which is really focusing on potential biases in access to grants. So working with research funding organizations, so national level. So this, you have here an image of what we've been funding under Horizon 2020. We already started funding the implementation of gender equality plan under FP7. So overall, we've funded over 180 separate organizations in the implementation of gender equality plans through 27 JEP projects, and for a budget of over 64 million euros. So it's quite an important investment, and we've been trying to build on the results of this project and the lessons learned to produce guidelines on the implementation of gender equality plans. And you can see here on the right an online tool that was developed by the DG Research and Innovation in collaboration with the European Institute for Gender Equality, which is the GEAR tool, Gender Equality in Academia and Research, which is a step-by-step guide with some concrete examples of what some organizations are putting into place, and also some national backgrounds that can help in contextualize the gender equality plan. And I'll take this opportunity to say that actually today, the European Institute for Gender Equality was releasing its Gender Equality Index, which is a composite index with several dimensions, including knowledge, so more related to education, power, which is decision-making, and which has one part of that indicator, which is the percentage of women on the boards of research funding agencies. And this overall, it doesn't show a lot of progress, unfortunately, overall in the EU. An interesting focus this year was digitalization. So they focused on these aspects, how it's affecting work, also on biases in artificial intelligence. So it's also very much related to the program, the cluster 4 that Nicolas presented earlier. And here you have I summarize, let's say, the contents of the gender equality plan that this partner, that's in project R&I Peers, has been developing. So NanoGune is a small private, not-for-profit nanotechnology institute in the Basque Country in Spain. And you can see here that they considered 8 areas that they decided to address. So it's really the point of a gender equality plan is really to address in a systemic ways different dimensions that are important for advancing gender equality in an RNI organization. And here they considered raising awareness on gender equality. They created a specific gender equality committee. They had their GEP adopted by the highest hierarchy of their institution. They run outreach activities. So this is also linked to public engagement and to science education. So different dimensions of RRI that was discussed earlier. Another dimension they looked at is the management and decision making. And in a small organization like theirs, it was a bit difficult, well, until now, because they're only halfway to really progress on that aspect. They have a focus on access to jobs and career advancement. So there they developed mentoring and really changing the way you recruit and promote, and also have a specific promotion for women and women researchers. And they have a strong focus on work-life balance. They developed teleworking, worked on the flexibility of the work time. They created a family club and have an agreement with a nearby daycare. On the working environment, they focused on harassment and sexual harassment in particular. Also, due to their field, so the nano field, there's a strong focus also on pregnancy protocol and safety of women in laboratories. The gender dimension, they also try to raise awareness in this field through different seminars, and also change their institutional communication. So you can see an example of what a gender equality plan, and this is really what we will be pushing in Horizon Europe. If you want to know more about what they're doing, you have the links here. And in the framework of Horizon Europe, we've discussed for over a year and even more now with stakeholders and partners in those GEP projects on what could be considered as really basic requirements for claiming that you have a gender equality plan. So we really, with respect to process, the four building blocks, we call them, that are considered as really being important for a gender equality plan, is having it as a public document. So really, it's a formal document signed by the highest level of the organization, and which is public and accessible on our website. You need to dedicate resources. So this can be earmarked funding for people or equality officers, and also trying to have some time, I mean, to recognize the work that's put into the gender equality work. You have to collect data. You need sex and gender disaggregated data across different fields relevant to your organization, and report on this. And you need to have training, awareness raising, and capacity building really on gender equality, and tackling in particular unconscious or implicit biases. And I see that in the work that you have been doing on GoNano, you do mention some of these elements, well, on training and gender stereotypes and implicit biases in particular. So these are key building blocks regarding process, and areas that should be covered and that we recommend to be covered by gender equality plans: work-life balance and organizational culture, gender balance in leadership and decision-making, gender equality in recruitment and career progression, integration of the gender dimension in research and teaching content when it's a teaching institution, and measures against gender-based violence, including sexual harassment. So you see that all these elements are included in the GEP from that nanotech company. And these things, as I said, we've been discussing for a while now, and we had a specific session. I don't know if you participated in the European Research and Innovation Day that were all virtual this year at the end of September. if you want to see the session that was dedicated to a new era, and there's a play on word there, for equality is calling, you can still have access to that session, and you will see our Director General and top academics and researchers discussing, in particular, the GEP, the gender equality plans, which are becoming an eligibility criterion in Horizon Europe indeed. So Horizon Europe, I believe you're familiar now with the general architecture, so 3 pillars, and an horizontal pillar, which is widening participation and strengthening the European research area. And one of these strands is called reforming and enhancing the European R&I system. And it's in this part that the support, the SWAFs-like support that we were giving to research and innovation organization and member states will be funded. And there's a strong integration throughout the program. And actually here you have some elements of the legal basis that show the strengthening of gender equality in Horizon Europe. There are specific articles in the framework regulation, in the specific program implementing the regulations. So
sorry to interrupt you, and just if you could wrap up just in the next couple of minutes. Sorry.
Yeah,
thank you.
I'll hurry up. So the integration of the gender dimension, I will focus on this because it is relevant in the nano field, not in all areas. Developing new materials, new nanomaterials, it may not be relevant, but to help us in doing that, we launched an expert group called Gendered Innovations, which looked into Horizon 2020 funded project and beyond to build case studies in different fields and develop methodology for sex, gender, and intersectional analysis to be integrated in the contents, and also to provide us with recommendation on how to really implement that through the work programs. Nicholas mentioned the cluster 4.1. It's true for all the work programs, all the clusters. Some case studies are already out. There was one ad hoc on sex and gender in the COVID-19 pandemic, which might be of interest to you, and also a fact sheet on gender intersectional bias in artificial intelligence. And the report is coming out next month. And just a few words on, I talked about the European Innovation Council, and really there's a whole work program and different initiatives that want to really foster gender equality in that field and have more women innovators. The EU Prize for Women Innovators has been running for a while. It's managed by the EIC, and it's quite successful. And many of those tech entrepreneurs are also in the nano area, but there are also other initiatives such as the Tech Start Women Initiative for really early stage startup that would be led by women, and even some actions to some targets in the percentage of women that you have at interviews in one of the schemes, which is the Accelerator scheme for women-led startups and SMEs. So a new focus really in this area. And I will stop here. Just tell you that if you want to know more, we have a gender equality policy page. You have the reference here. And if you're interested in particular on the impact on COVID-19, on health, but also in socioeconomic fields, and also the impact on women researchers themselves, their work-life balance and their increased caring roles, and how that has affected productivity, research productivities. You have some elements here. And that's it. And I'll be happy to hear from you if you have some questions.
That's great, and thank you so much. Really interesting. I'm so sorry that we have to cut it short, just in the interest of time. So thanks
No
so
problem.
much. I think the plan is now to go to a quick 5-minute energizer break, and then there's time
Great.
for Q&A afterwards. So go into Slido and make sure to add any questions that you have for myself or for Anne in there, and we'll do our best to answer them. So now, yeah, just a quick 5-minute break, and I'm being told that we're having eyeball yoga energizer, whatever that is. So over to you, Lisa, in Denmark, and we'll see you.
What a great session so far. Let's just have a small break and do a small activity where we can take our mind away from the session. So we're going to do a little exercise called eyeball yoga. So the first exercise is that you take 2 of your fingers like this and you put them up to your eyes and you rub them against your eyes, just like this. Then you take the palm of your hands and put them up and breathe in and out and just relax. And then you take them off and you open them wide and narrow. Next exercise is that we're going to move our eyes to the left and to the right. Okay, the next one is going to go a bit faster. We're going to go to the left, to the right, up, down, as fast as you can. Okay, let's try it. It's a bit difficult, but I think we managed. The next one we will try and go in circles. So follow the circle. I'm going to do it now. For this one, I want you to follow my fingers. So we're going to draw a set. Try and follow it. And back. I'm going to try it now. For this exercise, we're going to do the cross-eyed. So put your finger in the middle of your nose and try and look at it. And take away your finger and still look at your nose. That was it for now. Hope you are energized and are ready to take in all the good stuff from the conference, where we're going to head back to now.
Right, everybody. I think we are back now. Is that right? Yes. Okay. Great. So I hope everybody enjoyed the eyeball yoga, and you feel a lot more enthused, at least in your eyes. So David, I think have we gotten a couple of questions in?
Hold on. Yeah, much better when I unmute myself. So yes, we do have quite a number of questions. Some of them, I think, quite different nature and quite interesting. So the first one and I think that provides a good insight into the question that you've been discussing. Does having gender balance guarantee that gender dimensions are more fairly or more completely addressed?
Well,
yeah, I think you probably, do you want to start, Anne? Go ahead.
Sure. Well, no, but of course, I think that Vanessa explained very well that the diversity of point of views and perspectives. So in the composition of teams, this will help in doing better research, and that has more societal relevance. Do you? Sorry, I had the YouTube on, so do you still hear me?
We can hear you perfectly, yeah.
Okay, but it is an objective, of course, to have more women in, but it doesn't mean that the integration of the gender dimension of these questions will be taken into account in the research. For this, you do need to be sensitized, let's say, to of course, some research does show that if you have more women on team, they will be more prone to take into account the gender dimension. That's also true, but it's not. It doesn't guarantee.
Sure. And in that, I don't know, Vanessa, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of just echo everything Anne said, and I think, I mean, you can never guarantee, but I think what you can do is just to keep trying, basically. And I think there's, it's very important that, I mean, if you have a gender balance, that's obviously good. Hopefully it is more likely that it will address gender issues. But I think it's important as well that it doesn't become like a tokenistic exercise. Okay, God, we have, 8 women and 8 men. Great. We've ticked the gender box. Let's move on. That it's actually something that's done, it's kept in your mind, gender mainstreaming, essentially, that it's kept, in the forefront of everybody's mind from the very initiation of whatever it is you're doing, a workshop or a project or whatever it might be. And that way, if you're constantly coming back to it, there's more of a chance that it will be fairly addressed then. But yeah, I mean, that's just in addition to everything Anne said.
Thanks. And it's interesting because the questions are going in 2 different directions, but maybe based on what you just said, of what you just discussed, we can take the question that goes in specifically it goes into some specific impacts of possible co-creation on how to better consider gender and more general male-dominated culture. Is how might we do co-creation to help get at the ways that medical nanotechnologies might have gendered social cultural effects? And this is quite a big one.
Should I start? Okay, I'll go ahead. Actually, co-creation is something we do very much in the Commission across DGs and with member states. Within what I presented as Gender Equality Plan project, I wouldn't say that was the core focus, and I really think, actually, and that's I take the opportunity to say that your recommendation for co-creation could be very helpful for these gender equality plans and for the RNI peers and the nano partner there. With respect to medical nanotechnologies, so I'll take another take at this. It's clearly, and I don't think the GoNano really went into those aspects, but you did look into the risk and the different approaches to risk in nano, but everything that's related to the medical field and to pharmacology, and that has a link with humans, but with health, there the potential sex differences, biological differences. I mean, every human has a sex. Well, it's not only binary. You can have intersex as well, but every cell, every tissue has a sex. So these aspects really have to be built in the research on anything that is related to drugs, to prescription drugs. And in the expert group report that I mentioned earlier, there is one specific case study on pharmacology, on drug prescription. So then the co-creation aspect, I mean, as it was said earlier, there is really right now a strong opening to more citizen engagement. This has been already starting in the framework of the missions that have been developed. And there's one specific mission on cancer, on conquering cancer. And in there has been all kinds of citizen engagement activities, and this will go on. And some were taken at national levels, so some more at commission levels. So I think there's really room for more involvement in this field.
Yeah, I mean, just to add very briefly to what Anne said, because it's a little bit outside my area of kind of expertise, nanotechnology, medical inventions. But I mean, I really think, like you said, just the awareness of how sex and gender affects health, and again, from the start to have much more female participation in clinical trials, disaggregating the data, sex and gender, because they both affect, which I know you mentioned in your presentation. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that could go a long way towards helping address the issue. Even also in co-creation, maybe invite, if you're doing specifically on that, maybe make sure to invite like gender expert stakeholders, for example, might raise this issue as well. Mm-hmm. That's just a suggestion, maybe.
And that's a very good segue into one of the next questions that will probably draw more into your personal experience, and I think something that most of us can relate. How can you ask organizer of research and innovation events to invite inclusive speaker panels without being a bore? Being a bore? I mean, without appearing as the person raising issues that are not relevant, or
the gender police,
or just and more generally, I think this addresses the question: how do you relate to people who are still unaware or uncognizant of the value of doing such engagement, and of the value of bringing this diversity and gender balance into discussions that we may not have used these conversations in the previous decades or so? With data, we have a lot of evidence that it's good for science, and a lot of evidence that people hold implicit unconscious biases. So there's really research that we can show to researchers and innovation, and that will convince them. And the Commission itself has a policy on no women, no panel. When we organize events, there has to be at least one woman in the panel. So organizations, a lot of organizations do that as well. And I think we have strong arguments. It's also about, yes, putting forward the right arguments.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think it's such an important point about the panels, because, it's not only is it, people, contributing to a discussion or whatever, it's also even just the visual factor, only men, it's just kind of, again, this implicit bias. It just reinforces all these, very trite traditional stereotypes. And I think there's also I didn't know that about the Commission, no women, no panel. That's like, it's an exceptionally good rule. And I think there's also maybe an onus on scientists or researchers or whatever, stakeholders to say no if they get invited to a panel and they see that it's only men, to say no, I don't want to participate in such a one way panel, no way, and I'll participate if you reconsider in terms of the gender. Just to add to what Anne said, yeah, I mean, hit them with the data. I mean, it is difficult. I sympathize with the person who asked the question, because yeah, you do seem like a bore. Here comes the gender police, and oh my God, and we have to think about this, and we have so much extra work, and now we have to include this. But it's just very important, and it is difficult because it's a change of kind of a cultural mindset, a workplace mindset that has been like that for a very long time, whether it's in research or in academia or the corporate world, whatever it might be. And yeah, I think just frame, even just practically frame the question with data. We would like a more inclusive panel because it's much better, and it increases innovation and all these things, and just keep chipping away at it. That's all you can do, really, and hopefully it'll change eventually.
Thanks, Vanessa. And I will take one more question, but on this point, I just want to make one remark from my own perspective, because I think you said something very important. It confounds the issue to think that it's up to women in science to make this argument. And so it is, first of all, up to us as male to refuse to be part of panels. And it is very hard, whether it is in the academic world or even business world or NGO world where I come from, to pass on a possible opportunity to talk about what you're doing and to put yourself in front of something. But I've done it. I know we also have policy in my organization where we refuse to participate in panel where it is not gender balance and where at least there is not some form of inclusivity, etc. And in particular, when it comes to issues that are that relevant to gender issues. So I think this requires also reflection from all of us, and not just from the person who feel that they're impacted, because whether you think it is the case or not, as a male, you are being impacted by males as well, and you are being impacted, if only, as you just said, because the research outcome are poorer than if it was inclusive. So I think there's also a lot of education that have to go into colleague scientists to be able to pass on an opportunity to speak somewhere, to put yourself in front if it's not balanced. And in that case, I would recommend that all of us as male participant in these kind of issue always have a list of people where you could say, look, thank you very much for the invitation. I think you should speak to that person. And I think that person would be a better person. You can ease in a little educational talk at the same time because I think your panel is not balanced, or you can just hide behind something that is, look, I don't think I'm available. I don't think I would be the right person. Please speak to that person who would be a better participant to that panel. Maybe we have time for the last question. I will try to look away from our timekeeper so she doesn't tell me no. But it's a precise question as well. Do you see positive discrimination in recruitment as a short-time fix to help achieve balance in STEM, or should it be a long-term policy for employers? And I must say that is not part of the question, but I don't necessarily see those as mutually exclusive.
That's right. And I wouldn't call it positive discrimination. That's really, it's positive action. It's not discrimination. It's leveling the playing field, let's say. And yes, ideally, quotas, targets should be for a certain period to really do a step change. But honestly, and I'm thinking of this morning's presentation of the Gender Equality Index across the EU, and basically we won't reach gender equality for 60 years if we continue in this trend. So really there's still a lot of time, a lot of need for long-term policies on this. But clearly in many organizations, setting targets, setting quotas have changed things, and it also changes the mentality, the culture, and has a long-term positive effects.
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100% with John. I think both, you know, yes, short-term quotas, yes, definitely long-term policies, and I think both, and maybe even, you know, add a third thing that you can, you know, bunch in there as well to speed up the the process. And I think as well, yeah, I mean, positive discrimination, it's not, it sounds negative, the term, because it's, you know, discrimination, you're discriminating against who really? I mean, you're actually just rebalancing something that was so skewed to begin with. But I'm getting angry caps, letters, messages in the chat about our timekeeping. So we're going to have to wrap it up, unfortunately. Thank you so much. And it's been a pleasure. Really enjoyed hearing all your contributions. Thank you so much. David, thanks a million as well. And yeah, over to you, Lisa. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Well, I would like to thank you everyone as well. Also, thank you, Pépin, for participating today on a short notice. Thank you for your great talk. Vanessa, thank you very much as well, also for co-hosting this session with us and for hosting today with us as well. David, thank you very, very much for your role and your task and everything that you've done today in the chat as a chat moderator. It's time now for us to wrap up the whole of the session of today, and we would very much like to hear what you take with you from today's sessions. That question is open in the Slido Q&A for you to add your takeaways. And then while you do that, David and I will just check in with Søren to see how he has been getting along with the drawing and graphical representation of our discussion today. Søren, are you still there?
Yes, I am. Hello.
Oh, very good. Hi, Søren.
It was very exciting. I got so much information. I'll share my screen.
Yes, please.
I kind of got inspired. I didn't get time to get around everything. Can I have another hour or two?
No.
Okay.
We're very strict with time.
So I kind of approached it like all this talking, like when you do illustrations for newspapers. You know, for when there's a debate. I'll share. There we go.
Thank you very much. David, you're also still muted. So.
Yes, I was trying just to stay muted until I had something clever to say. But...
Okay.
And this drawing is not finished yet. I kind of that down in the left corner where the gender climb. That's where I wanted to sum up what's the whole talk has been about. Do I need to zoom in on any parts of the drawing?
I think it's we're very engaged in looking now at your drawing and trying to get all the. I definitely recognize different elements of the conversation, the gender climb. But maybe David, you want to jump in since you were actively taking part in the Q&A.
No, I think the gender climb is a very clever way of, and that is the value of drawing to a large sense. You can, you know, in one synthetic drawing, you can get a summary of a quite large and deep conversation. You know, an image is worth 1,000 words, and I think this is a very good illustration of this. Pun only half intended. One of the things that I think I'm not seeing in this drawing, and it might appear in a different drawing because I know there was a lot of discussion here, was the first part about how gender and diversity in general leads to better outcome, richer, more adequate, more closer to people's expectations outcome. And yeah, I'm not saying this, but again, as you mentioned, there was quite a lot of input and quite some deep discussion. But I would have loved to see what you would do with this. And so I know we don't have it online, but I'm willing to give you an extra couple of hours if you can send me your drawing in the end.
Yes,
John, yes.
I would like to do that drawing. I ran out of time as well. The way I structure it was that in the top we have the problems, you know, diversity and health and research and all that. I didn't get to the thing David is approaching, and then the challenge for me is the gender climb, and then I need a whole other paper where I can illustrate how to solve it. This is all the problems right now, and I would love to do that drawing, but it may not be today. But if both Vanessa and Anne and Lisa and David and who else want to help me do this drawing, I would like to, because to me it's not finished yet. This little comic story is not finished yet. We need the solution.
I think that would be great, Son, if you would commit yourself to continuing working on a second drawing
Yes.
where we approach some of the solutions. Now, I am, of course, time conscious that we have 2 minutes left of the official program. And I wanted to also just give us a chance to visit the take-home messages that our audience report in the Slido Q&A. And I also would like to both talk a little bit about the session that we have next Thursday. And I would also like to inform you about the informal networking session that we have once the conference finishes. Okay, but first, David, let's have a look at what's come in the Slido Q&A. Definitely this point on diversity and inclusiveness has made an impact on our audience, co-creation.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to switch to my phone because this is the time my browser has decided that it was enough work for him today and that it was about to crash.
But a lot of take-home messages definitely on this gender equality approach. Inspiration, that's nice. No women, no panel. Support for that. Support for this need to think more about incentives for participants from civil society. That should become clear. What is the added value also for them to spend their time and to participate? I think we can support. There's a longer one on gender and diversity is important. Maybe STEM can learn from medicine and biomedicine areas. Research which appears to be several decades further down the road to achieving gender balance and is improving in diversity in general. Also useful information on co-creation strategies. I think this is very nice, very positive take-home messages. So also thank you very much from me and I think from us to the audience today for all your very good questions and valuable input that you provided in various forms in the Slido. We really appreciate that a lot. So as I said, now we have a transition to a network event. But before we go there, I just want to remind you that our next session is on November 5th. So it's next Thursday, same time from 1 to 4 p.m. Central European time. The next session will delve much deeper into our experience with this co-creation process that we ran. And we will also have testimonials from participants, various participants in our co-creation experience, both researchers, industry, business, but also citizen participants. So please, next Thursday, there will be much more in-depth and detailed information. So make sure to schedule that into your agendas. Today, we do not have much more on the official program, but as I said, we have organized a Zoom meeting for those of you who would like to stay and network and talk a bit more informally. And the link to that Zoom meeting, that should be coming up in your YouTube chat, where you can log in and join this informal Zoom events. I would also like to just remind you before you go that on November 12th, our two speakers, Anne Pépin and Deliyanakis, will take part in the policy roundtable panel in order to discuss also policy recommendations and solutions in more detail. Okay, I think that was also it for me today. Now, I hope that I will see you in the Zoom room in a minute. Thank you very much, everyone, and take care.
And before everyone goes, I want to thank